Baker. Mr. Jordan Baker.
We've been making significant growth for several years. We can see that with advantage testing in math. We see it in our reading data, district reading data. Our kids are outperforming others in our district. Just in our open responses on our MCAS data, we outperform the state. So that's telling, because that all comes from a school-wide focus that we have, all teachers speaking the same language, professional development built around our school-wide focus. Everybody's invested, and once you start seeing that data and knowing that what you're doing is really making a difference, the more ownership you take on it and the more teachers are collaborating around how to better instruct students in their classroom.
Our school's been working on T-charts for a while. For first grade, we've had a lot of conversation around where should it go. We don't want to push them too much because we want what they're doing to be really understood. That is where my thoughts on the lesson today sort of came from, is what's going to actually make the T-chart more meaningful.
These words that you just thought about are going to help you answer my question. And you're going to get in your groups after I give you the question, and your job is to work in your groups to answer my question using your T-charts. Remind me what goes on this side of the T-chart. Somebody raise their hand and remind me. What goes on this side of the T-chart? Larissa?
Your answer.
Your answer. And on the other side, we have our
Evidence.
Our evidence. You have to prove that it's right. You can't just answer a question and say, oh, that's it, right? You have to prove that it's right. And we have to make sure we prove that it's right using information from our book, right?
You can't use information if it's not in the book.
Can't use information if it's not from the book.
We've done a lot of work around text-based questions, answering with multiple pieces of evidence from the text, they're collaborating as teams, developing questions that are good, thoughtful, thought-provoking questions. A lot of that work is done at Common Planning. When we're really analyzing text that we're using with students, we're looking at student responses about text, and that's all at Common Planning.
Yeah, you know what I think was most tricky about the question was that there were actually 3 different relationships that they could have had. Right. So I think when you send them off on their own and they're thinking there's just, well, they're neighbors, you know, they're very literal, so they come up with one answer. So I think there definitely needs to be a little bit of talk around the types of relationships they could have,
Right.
yeah. And then they could possibly be able to do it independently.
Yeah.
Deb?
Good to know.
I'm excited about the big T-chart that I saw in your room and having the children do that instead of this.
I liked it. I think it was a great, I do think that should be my next step, maybe. Can they then now, who can carry that over, what they worked as a group to do, and transfer it to an individual T-chart? So have that be their next group work or a station, or follow it up some way where they actually are doing their independent T-chart, because that's important too.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to scaffold the T-chart in general. We could do that again with another story, another question, have them go off and work in a group, and then go off and do an independent T-chart.
Right.
That might be a nice way.
Yeah.
I like it.
Students are starting to learn how to read a piece of literature or informational text and find evidence within that text to support an opinion. It takes a lot of modeling at this point, but it's also a very important skill. What is something that happens in the text? Because saying that he feels a little guilty, that's an inference, right? We're inferring that. So what is the evidence in the text that tells us that he might feel just a little bit bad about the way that he treated Molly? We always like to go over the text and create our own model or exemplar, so to speak, so that we know when we're bringing it into the classroom what an exemplary piece would look like. We know what the expectation is from the students. So the first answer starts right on page 60. An answer would be how it's the wet season. The wet season makes it a unique place to visit.
Can you give us some direct evidence?
Sure.
Also on page 61, the village school is like a treehouse perched on stilts.
So in the past, teachers would just come up with their own open response questions. Students would answer them. We'd come back to common planning, and there was no commonality, no coherence on the team level. But now that we're creating those questions together and having those conversations together, by developing those common questions and generating T-charts together, teachers come back with similar student work that we can have conversations about. So that time has been critical to get teachers all on the same page and really coming up with good questions for their students to answer.